Hello and welcome to the very last little YouTube film from schools and colleges as organisations. So this is our last one. Can you believe it? A little bit sad. What a rubbish way to end our nice little course. Anyway, what we're looking at now is we're looking at 4.1 and 4.2. So that is to explain why schools and colleges have policies and procedures. So we'll have a bit of a recap on what policies and procedures are. Then we'll have a look at the huge list of policies and procedures that you need to be aware of. And then we'll talk about what you need to do for your assessment for this one. It's a really nice, straightforward, simple one to end with. Okay, so if you have a look at the PowerPoint that I sent you, slide 1 tells you what we're up to. I'm doing a clever little split screen thing, so I might be a bit distracted. Okay, slide 2, a quick reminder of what policies and procedures are. Obviously, not that we need one. So the policy is what we want to achieve, what we want to do. That's our aim. Our policy, our idea, our intention is to do this. That's that. The procedure is how we're going to do it. So for example, our fire policy is that nobody gets burnt alive. Our procedure would be the fire drill. So it's all the steps that we have to take. Okay, so when you're looking, when you look on websites, you see policies and procedures often together under one headline. They might just call them policy. So you look and see the top bit will tell you what the policy is, what they want to do, and then the procedure will list the individuals who have got sort of specific responsibilities. So, for things like the policy on special educational needs, the main person with specific responsibilities will be the SENCO. There'll be sort of named roles, and in some schools or colleges, they'll actually put the named roles and the name of the person in the role. Policies and procedures have to be reviewed every year, so they have to make sure they're fit for purpose. They have to be read, they have to be looked at by the Board of Governors and agreed. And so if there's a change of role or a change of way things are being done, then that's when they get updated. I'm looking through some of the policies and procedures for schools locally. Some are quite old, so that's a concern. But anyway, on the whole, they should all have, as part of their paperwork, they should all look sort of familiar, and they should all have, date that it was reviewed, and then there should be a due date. That's an important thing to remember for when we come to the assessment. Okay, so why do settings even have them? Well, before schools and colleges all had policies and procedures that were fed into by government and agreed upon and were similar, it just meant that everyone could do things really, really differently. And so what could be a way of working in one school could be completely different to a different school in a different place. So lots of the policies have got like a legal background. So schools in the UK have got to follow some of the legal stuff. So that's things around some of the legislation we've looked at. So safeguarding, that kind of stuff, because that comes from specific laws that we've looked into. And what's really important with policies and procedures is that there is a sort of consistency, so you can have the same kind of experience. I mean, schools, want the best for their pupils, they want to support pupils. Again, they are there's lots of legal situations which mean that they've got to comply with supporting pupils. So policies and then the procedures really help to make sure that that is actually happening clearly. When Ofsted come in and they want to see how maybe some kind of a situation is being handled, they'll look at the policy and then they will check that it's actually being followed, and the people who are named in the policy actually know what they're doing. Quite often when Ofsted come in, they will ask support staff about things like, disclosure of abuse, that kind of thing, to make sure everybody knows. So they'll go for the very important things, the things which are the same in all schools, and they will not try and catch you out, but they need to know that the policy is working. And if staff don't know the answers, that's because there needs to be more training put in. So then, there's the responsibilities for annual training, which will fall usually to the DSL, to make sure that everybody knows. So it's quite a useful thing to have. So it means that everybody knows what they have to do. It outlines who's responsible for what within the setting. For new staff, it's a really useful reference point, because when you move to a new position, it can be very overwhelming, particularly if it's your first job in education. So it's a reference point. It's online. It will outline who you need to speak to about specific things, and what to do. If you go home with a concern, you can just get back on there and you can see. And also for parents, you might have a situation with your child is being bullied, or your child is a bully. There might be something around, I don't know, drugs or weapons in school. You can clearly see what the school intends to do, so it can be very useful. It can sort of map the procedure, and if you feel that they're not following their own policy, then that's another conversation you can have with them. So the fact that it's very public and held in a place that parents and carers and students can also see it, it means that there's a greater accountability. Schools have got to be able to show what they're doing. So what kind of policies are there? So we've got to have a look at 3 different areas. We're going to look at the policies that mainly affect staff, then student welfare, and then teaching and learning. So let's have a look at staff first of all. So here we've got quite a few things. Performance management. So all schools have got to make sure that they have regular appraisals with line managers to make sure that staff are performing well. You have to have a certain amount of observed lessons each year. You've got to show that you are taking on board feedback from that kind of stuff. That's the fire alarm, because my husband's cooking, because I'm in here. Health and safety, we all know we've all got responsibilities under health and safety legislation, Act of 1974 for that. So obviously that's going to affect staff. First aid, DBS checks, obviously very important. Allegations of abuse against staff, what to do if a student makes some allegations about you. Pay, so that will gender pay gap, that kind of stuff. Confidentiality we looked at in our last unit, the safeguarding. Grievance, so if you feel like you're not being dealt with fairly. Whistleblowing, if you see something which you don't like and you report it, there's a policy to what to do and what you can expect, to make sure that you don't receive discriminatory behaviour around anything to do with whistleblowing. And the CPD, the continuous professional development, you have to show that you have a certain amount of hours each year where you are training, because obviously nothing stays still around the way that schools are managed and run, but also in terms of curriculum and new developments, depending on what your subject area is, or if you're working with support, new methods of dealing with different behaviours, or different types of learning difficulties that you might be experiencing. So it's good that to show, you have to prove that you are doing training, and they have to, schools and colleges have got to give you opportunities to get that amount of training in, whether that's going to seminars in the evening, doing online training, having guest speakers in. Often on inset days there'll be a section of compulsory training for everybody, just to make sure that people are constantly refining their skills. If you start working in schools and in a couple of years you haven't taken on any training or learned anything new, your practice is never going to change. But being able to discuss techniques and different ways of doing things, obviously it means that the job is more interesting. You do a better job of it. It's much more satisfying. Okay, policies relevant to student welfare, quite a lot here. Safeguarding, obviously, health and safety, including trips, that kind of thing. National and local statutory guidelines for child protection, so they might be slightly different depending on whereabouts you live in the UK. Disability and access, so again that looks at our participation, our EDI module, the work we did there. The fact that they've got to be able to access all parts of the curriculum and adjustments need to be made. Online safety, anti-bullying, drugs awareness, data protection, looked at in safeguarding. Mobile phone and social media comes under e-safety possibly. Sickness, medication, first aid. You remember we looked at the that in health and safety when we had to look about storage of medicines, etc. Supporting pupils with medical conditions. That's quite an interesting policy to look at. So yeah, that's steps to take to make sure people who've got ongoing issues can be supported, and you know what to do and who's going to be responsible for that. Annual reporting. So each year students who have got a special educational need to have a report made to make sure that things are in place to support them, that they've got enough resources, if they've got, you know, if their staff to pupil ratio is right. Confidentiality. PSHE, so the sorts of topics that can be looked at in that, as well, sex education. So schools, because that they can be quite, you know, PSHE, they're talking about all sorts of things: addiction, self-harming, road traffic accidents, you know, and also with sex education, these can be quite inflammatory topics. So it's quite useful that schools have got a printed sort of policy that they can signpost guardians, parents, carers to, so everyone's clear of what the expectations are there. Behaviour code of conduct, attendance and punctuality. So that's pretty much it for the student welfare. Let's have a look at the teaching and learning. So teaching and learning has a specific policy in terms of training, contact time, that kind of thing. Equal opportunities, early years, they have different ways of organising themselves that you might want to have a look at into, particularly if you're interested in going into sort of like the preschool side of things. Sixth form, learner commitment, special educational needs, planning and assessment, homework, so the amount of homework that's set, the quality of it, marking, what the marking policy is. Ideally it's consistent, so people mark in the same way. So a geography teacher will use the same colour and the same codes as an English teacher, so students can understand what's going on. How long it should take to get your work back. Curriculum policies for different subjects, so there'll be some change in that, and it's very important that you are keeping abreast of any changes. Enrichment, so the things, so it's things like trips and guest speakers and things which enrich the learning activity. It's really desirable to do as much of that as possible. So you know, it's important that there's a policy so people are aware that they need to do that. School or college development plan. So that's it for the teaching and learning, and you're not expected to read all of these policies and learn all about every single one of them. When you start working in your setting, there will be some policies particularly that you will need to be aware of, so that's safeguarding, health and safety, e-safety, that kind of thing. You know, those are the main ones, but knowing that all this information is around, you know, bits of it will be really useful for you, bits of it you'll never have to look into. What we need to do for the assessment is you need to choose just one of those policies to look at. Some of these policies, like the safeguarding one, are absolutely massive, pages and pages and pages and pages on a website. What you need to do is you need to choose one of them. And ideally, if you choose one which has got very sort of clearly defined steps, and maybe a clearly defined person who's got some kind of responsibility in it, there is a form on your assessment sheet which you need to fill in just looking at one policy. Okay, so have a little look and see which one you fancy. Go for something which isn't massive, because what you need to do for this part of the for this final assessment is that you need to really be able to understand the policy, talk about exactly what it sets out to do, who's got responsibilities for it, and when it's going to be reviewed. So all of that information will be there, so just don't go for a massive one. The rest of the assessment, you've just got some information about why schools have policies and procedures. You then have to just copy out all of those policies into your assessment workbook, and then just look at one policy and complete that. And that, everybody, is the last assessment. Quite a nice one to finish on, I think you'll agree. Quite nice and straightforward. Okay, so good luck with that. Obviously, email me if you get stuck. Okay, see you later.